Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, my guest is Brady Crook. She is the founder and host of the Embracing Layers Network. She is not only leading a podcast, hosting YouTube panels, and promoting a book. Melissa is leading conversations and has created a beacon for women ready to prioritize their well-being and embrace their complex layers. Her unique approach includes introducing guests by their character traits, featuring 8 talking points and 2 life-informing questions. This provides a structured path for self-discovery and empowerment. Invite Melissa to lead your community of women onto a journey of supporting each other to live unapologetically and out of their own expectations. So 2 things. Melissa, I'm so sorry for my voice today for your podcast episode, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Karen. And thank you for taking the time to do this. We women, we do things that are above and beyond. And you are an example of that today. And I hope that you feel free to go straight back to bed and take care of yourself the rest of the weekend after we're done. But I'm so honored to be here with you. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you're doing and the conversations you're having.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So tell me, what was the appeal about being on Heal, Thrive, Dream today?
You were addressing topics with women when it comes to the impacts of trauma that too many of us are experiencing but don't feel safe to talk about. And so we are carrying it in our bodies to unsafe levels, and we are requiring and asking ourselves to perform for affirmation. We are trying to constantly please, showing up codependently, showing up as people pleasers to satisfy these things in our brains that have been manifested many times by years of trauma that have sent us incorrect messages about how we're supposed to show up in the world. And it's hurting us and in some cases killing us, because carrying this kind of a trauma load over time is going to impact your mental, physical, emotional health. It shows up as anxiety, depression, sometimes suicidal ideations, heart problems, high blood pressure. There are so many things that factor into. We were not designed to carry and stuff. We were designed to process and move through and acknowledge and accept without shame. But because of the cultural narratives that abound for women starting as little girls, and especially if you've come from an abusive background, do not lead us to a safe place, even now in 2025. And so what you're doing is so important. I do a broader version of that with my work. With my hope is like, ladies, let's get together and do this together and provide safe spaces for each other to accept and embrace all of our stories. And let's together be a voice in this. Let's talk about the importance of unpacking the shame and processing. I don't believe in good or bad. Emotions are clues. They are clues of things that are hurting in us, that need to be unfolded when it's those harder emotions. Sometimes emotions are wonderful and they're meant to be expressed, but we tend to want to express the wonderful, joyful ones, and we want to press and suppress and ignore the hard ones because we've been told so many false narratives of what it means to be angry, sad, all those kinds of things. And we need to feel and move through them, process them, accept them. We don't have to love all the seasons of our life, but we can. I had to learn this myself. This is all from my own journey. I have not been here. And this is not my natural way of being. I had to learn this the hard way in many ways. But one thing that I've learned in therapy and from Ted Lasso, to be honest, is to be curious rather than judgmental. So it's allowed me to look at the places in my life that I have not loved, decisions I have not loved, relationships that have been harmful. And instead of being judgmental and shameful of myself for those seasons, getting curious and being like, oh, given that I grew up with this narrative and had these experiences, it makes sense. That would be a situation I would have found myself in, given what I knew and had experienced at the time. Don't love it, won't repeat it, but I can move away all the judgment and just be like, oh, that makes sense. And so, yeah, that is a really long answer, but why I think what you're doing here is so important and why I started my work is let's take the stigmas and shame off these conversations we've been told not to have, to keep in secret, that we aren't to share publicly.
And before you talk a lot about your work, I think it's important if you're willing to share some of your own personal traumas, like not in great detail, so the audience is aware that probably my guess is that a lot of your experiences have given you a purpose in the work
Mhm.
that you're doing now. Anything about your past that you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I grew up in a very emotionally unstable household, a lot of emotional and mental. I didn't know it was abuse at the time. And when the first time a therapist said that to me in my early 20s, I was shocked. Like it was such the normal experience that, and I grew up where it wasn't abuse unless it was physical or sexual. Mental and emotional abuse did not exist. My dad really prided himself on the fact that he didn't beat us. It was like a badge of honor. Sadly, because of his own narrative and his own background, it was actually better in our household than what he grew up with, but it still did an incredible amount of harm. My mom had her own trauma background. And so it was a very emotionally volatile background combined with a very restrictive, conservative faith space that my parents joined when I was about 3.5 years old, that just added to the expectation and the narratives and stigmas about girls and women and how they should show up in the world. But I was expected at a very early age to carry the weight of managing the emotional temperature in our household, really starting at the age of 6. And I won't go into all the narratives how this happened, but this is where between 4 and 8 there was a real shift in I knew I had to show up really well and really perfectly all the time, so I didn't set off my parents. So I was also had younger brothers as I got older. I'm like, you can't do this, you got to do this, or getting mad at them because you're going to set them off, make them mad, there's going to be an explosion. And so I learned from, it really became clear at age 6 that this was mine to carry. And as I went on, my parents asked more and more for me to be responsible for their emotional. They didn't consciously do this. It was just their way of being. They had no emotional intelligence and no space or place where they were told it was okay to even get into their own trauma. And only quote unquote crazy people went to therapy. And it was just such an interesting time. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And so I learned very quickly, behave well, don't be selfish, show up for everybody else, don't prioritize yourself, make sure you're behaving so you don't, as if it was my responsibility as a child to not set off my parents. And these explosions look like huge blowups, yelling, screaming, slamming doors, throwing things, saying horrible things to each other, my parents, or my brothers and I getting spanked, sent to our room for even expressing a concern or disagreement. We were not to have any emotions ourselves. We were not to cry. We were told to dry it up. There was just so much of that. And so by the time I was 15, my mom was relying on me as her emotional support system rather than just allowing me to be her daughter. And she started getting very jealous of relationships I was having outside of that, not with just friends my age, but other women, where I was looking to like, this cannot be healthy. And so any other woman that was in her age group that I looked to as a mentor, she was jealous of, she was mad about. And my dad just continued to try. And I got in trouble when I was 15 years old for talking to what I thought was a family friend about the volatility in our household and how it was really concerning. And I thought my parents needed help. And this friend thought he was helping and went back to my parents. I got grounded for having those conversations. And so this was the kind of volatility. And until I got to college and got away, got some space, I also in high school and the first half of college was in a very emotionally disruptive, abusive relationship with a guy who, not surprisingly operated a lot like my dad. And there was a lot of emotional, mental, sexual manipulation going on there to keep me in line. And I came from a conservative background that if you had sex with a guy, you better marry him because otherwise you were dirty. So then there was all of these other purity culture, just the mounds of things. So by the time I got to 21 and I got out of that relationship and had been away from my own home long enough to start actually the person I was working for actually got me into therapy. She said, I think you need some help. What's being asked of you. And it was the first moment. And this was the first of 3 rounds of therapy that I went through as an adult before at age 50, I hit a wall. Even with all the work and realization, I had continued to carry, and a wonderful partner and beautiful daughters, I had carried so much of this with me that I still hadn't processed. I was still very hypervigilant in my performance. Had a lot of anxiety that I carried with me, a lot of OCD-like tendencies, intrusive thoughts of how I must be all the time. And it showed up in codependent people pleasers make great employees, sadly.
Yes.
And so,
Workaholics.
Exactly. So this showed up in all these different spaces. And I literally got to age 50. My kids were all out of the house, either in college. One was almost married by that point. And my husband and I, it was just the 2 of us. And my body had been crying out to me for a few years with some different symptoms, but got real serious, like racing heartbeat, sky high blood pressure, anxiety attacks, which I thought were heart attacks at the time. I thought I was having a heart attack or a stroke. Ended up in the ER twice in a 2-week period. All the tests on all my organs, saw a heart specialist, the whole thing. They're like, there's nothing physically going on here other than you are perimenopausal. So there's some hormone shifts and also a truckload of stored trauma and high levels of anxiety. So I started working with the nurse in the ER. I think this holistic health doctor can help you with some of these balances, but also my husband sat me down. He's, babe, it's time to get serious about getting some help. This anxiety that's showing up now, you have carried the whole time we've been together. It's just manifesting in a way that's demanding you to pay attention. And I want it's time to prioritize you. And so that fall of 2019, I got into therapy and finally just as it's time to go in. And so and then through that, about 2 years into that, I realized I'm not the only woman going through these things. I'm not the only one. And we have to start talking about the things that are keeping us from being as healthy and authentic and safe and well as we should be. We have to start seeing our value as humans through who we are, not what we do or how we perform. We've got to take these shame narratives off of discussions around these emotions that are impacting us. It is not sinful to be angry. Now, you can do some damaging things with that anger, but the anger itself is a normal, important emotion to pay attention to. It needs to be processed, and it can actually really motivate you to do some really important things to move the needle. So that's just one example of what I had to release from my body. And once I did that, somatically, my body just lit up. Like I was feeling it everywhere because my nervous system finally realized it was safe to allow me to start exploring this. But that first 6 to 9 months, I'm like, I've got numbness here and tightness there and pain here. And it was all these things coming to surface that I'd never made space for before. And slowly over time, these symptoms, as I checked the list, the different items I needed to walk through and release and heal from, these symptoms slowly started subsiding. No, I'm not completely free of all this. It's still a part of my existence, and I'm still learning and unpacking layers that still need to be moved through. But my point in starting this work was, we don't have to get to where I got. We don't have to wait till you're middle-aged to start seeing this and dealing with this. Let's get this framework in women's hands when they're in their teens and 20s. Let's change the way we're talking to our little girls about how they are to show up in the world. And let's help them interrupt these cycles and generational narratives and traumas and impacts. There was a lot of trauma-informed relationships in my life. There were a lot of codependent relationships in my life. And I had to really get honest with myself about what was serving me and what wasn't. But yeah, I knew that these conversations, and so that's the why behind my work.
Beautiful. It sounds like the relationships that were toxic or not healthy in some kind of way went bye-bye. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I had to set some healthy boundaries for myself. And I had to even learn what those were. I did not know what those were. My oldest daughter, and I have 3 daughters, all grown now. They all went through various experiences in college, through some internships and some practice things that they had going on that they participated in, where they were able to come to a realization of some language that we had not heard before about prioritizing your self-care as a woman, setting healthy boundaries, living out of your own expectations, identifying what your why and your values are, and building your life around that rather than what everyone else was asking and expecting of you, and not paying attention to whether that was in alignment with even how you wanted to show up in the world or not. And so they started bringing this language home, and it started with the healthy boundaries. And our oldest daughter started with, I'm no longer going to engage in conversations that become emotionally volatile and we just keep going. If they become emotionally volatile, I'm going to call a timeout. I'm going to stop the conversation. I'm going to stop participating, and we'll come back to it at a time where everyone's at a calmer space, whether it's me or you or whatever. And this was a shock to me. And we had a pretty good relationship, but at times, because of what I'd grown up in, I would just keep hammering a point home, and I would not release it no matter what emotional state I was in. And it was not healthy. And so it was our first, and it took me a while to understand what this meant. But through doing this work and starting to appreciate the power of boundaries and the power of being able to state for myself and get real curious and serious about how my body was impacted when I was around certain people. My body had been sending me messages for years. When I would go into certain environments with certain family members, it would seize up. All the cues were telling me this is not safe. And I kept going in. I kept trying to be an influence. And hopefully if they saw how I was living my life with my family, that they'd be influenced to shift and do the same. And they just weren't following suit. And after 10 years of trying and pushing and trying again, because I had a 10-year hiatus when my girls were born, where I had no contact with my family. I was like, my family is not going to be around this kind of activity. After 10 years, they came back, they apologized. And we had about a 10-year time where I allowed them in. And when they were in my home, I was very clear about what was and wasn't allowed in my home in terms of how you talk to each other, how you talk to your partner. It didn't even have to do with me. It was like, in my house, you will not talk to her that way. In my house, you will not. If you want to do this in your own house, whatever, that's not my place. But in my house, these are my expectations. But whenever I would go into their
Very good.
spaces, yeah, it was free of that. And I finally realized after a lot of trying to explain it, that I finally got through to me through a lot of therapy and a lot of support from my daughters and my family. Like, you are not responsible for your family's choices. You are not responsible to make them change. They have to see it and want to do it themselves. And it's okay for you to remove yourself from that and no longer put yourself through what it's costing you. And my oldest daughter was very clear about that, especially she's like, and to this day, she's like, you owe those people nothing. They have already taken
He's
so
so
much from
wise.
you. She's very wise. They're like, you don't have to do that, Mom. You don't have to live that way. And my husband's same way. And and it was interesting with one particular family member. I was just like, I will love you from afar, but for me, I cannot have conversations that happen in this way. I will not participate in it. If that is not something that works for you, that's your decision. I'm just telling you how I won't participate. So now we very much love each other from afar. It's a very limited communication. Haven't seen that person. And then for my parents, it was interesting. My dad cut me off. He was unhappy that I'd started healing, that I'd started the podcast, that I was starting to talk about these things openly, not in it. I never use names. It's not disrespectful, but it's honest. Listen, these people came from a background where they didn't know any different, but they continued and they did the best they can. And that still caused harm. All these things can be true. And they didn't. And so I don't want any more contact with you. It's harmful. Don't follow me on social media. And my mom just went along with it. She's very passive aggressive. She doesn't speak up. She is one of the most unhappy people you'll ever meet in your life. And she does mix so I'm like, okay, fine. And honestly, it's sad. And also my life has never been more peaceful because I'm no longer trying to manage situations that don't want to be different and that completely disrupt my nervous system, my emotional and mental safety. And so, yeah, that there are my immediate family and that I grew up with. I have two brothers that I have some contact with, one a little more than the other because he's done some work and I think he'll get there. He's still where I was 20 years ago of trying to fix everybody. I think you just have to get there over time, unfortunately. And then there's one brother who's dealt with his trauma in very harmful ways. And so for a lot of reasons, there's no contact there. And then my parents chose to pull away. And I'm like, it's on you if you ever want to talk to me again. And honestly, unless you've gone down a path, it's probably that of healing and reconciliation. They could never understand or accept the nuance of, yes, I know you did the best you could. And also, yet you did a lot of harm in the way that
Both
you
things
live.
are true, like you
Both
said.
things are true. And they cannot hold the nuance of that.
Yeah. It takes work.
It does. It does. And I had to release. And I'm finally, the guilt piece has finally stopped looming about that, about the last year. It's taken time. At first, there was a lot of guilt because it was so in my narrative to fix everything all the time. And I remember my oldest daughter saying to me at one point when she was in college and she was talking to me about a situation she was in. And I jumped in to give her help. And she said, I don't need you to fix this, Mom. I just need you to listen. I don't expect you, want you, need you to fix this. And it was a real alert to me. That was the beginning of the alert of, oh my gosh, this is what I do. And then I had relationships and friendships where I just emotionally dumped. Like all this I was carrying and I had to shift those narratives too, as well as how I was showing up in these lifelong friendships and what I was bringing to it that was harmful. So I had to own my peace and accountability in that as well.
Wow, there's so much there. I'm really proud of you for setting such needed boundaries for yourself. It was pretty amazing how you explained that. So tell us a little bit. We're pretty close on time. I want to hear more about your podcast and what you do for work if it's related as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has become my work. I unexpectedly lost my full-time job in summer of 2022 at a small nonprofit. Ended up being a blessing in many ways because my husband and I talked, and it allowed me to really fully engage. I'd been doing this for a little over a year. I'm like, I think this is where my heart is calling me. This is what I feel aligned to do. And so we founded the Feel podcast in 2021. The acronym is Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers. And we walk guests through, we bring women on from all kinds of backgrounds, many of them women I know when we started out, especially because I knew so many women that would be so helpful to hear from and share their stories and have so many great resources for the listeners. But they were women I was in relationship and knew. And I started off with, we're introducing by character traits, not by what you do. We need to, as women, start identifying who we are and allow that to be the foundation.
I love
And
that. That's beautiful.
and that was one of the first things I was seeing is we're identifying ourselves by these roles and these titles. And when these roles and titles disappear, because things change, seasons change, jobs change, kids grow up, relationships end, sometimes divorce, there's all kinds of things that happen. And if we are firmly entrenched in that being our identity, then all of a sudden you're lost. You have no concept. Whereas, okay, let's start here. Let's get women naming their own character traits and introducing themselves to who they are and introducing them that way. And then we walk through prioritizing self-care, setting healthy boundaries, seeing the connection between emotional, mental, physical, spiritual health, showing up unapologetically and supporting other women in doing so, identifying your why and your values and everything you do, and making sure your calendar and your life aligns with that. And that really informs like, oh gosh, okay, maybe not. So this is where I need to set some healthy boundaries around my time, my clock, who I give my time to. Communicating and living out of your own expectations. Okay, now I got to communicate this, especially when you make big shifts in your life. People aren't mind readers. All of a sudden, you're going to have to communicate those things and let people know and even get familiar yourself. And then by living out feel, embrace, and this really is, I think, is the key piece. And sometimes is really where you have to start. You've got to embrace all your beautiful, complex, messy, ugly, complicated layers, because we prioritize what we value. And if we don't value ourselves, we won't prioritize ourselves. And so that's a really key component. And then I always wrap the conversations up with, tell me about, by going through this framework. And mind you, no one has this down perfectly. This is a framework of questions to ask yourself continually to make sure you're staying on track. It's a lifelong process. It's not I'll do this for 6 months and everything will be good. No, you got to keep coming back to them. But in doing that, you really start seeing the difference in how you're relating to, how by living out feel, you're relating with yourself in a more healthy way, you're relating in your relationships in a more healthy way, and you're attracting the kind of relationships that are healthy for you with people that value you as much as you value yourself. And then I wrap it up with, ask people to name 5 activities that nourish them and 5 words in how they want to feel the next 6 months. And when I'm in workshops and women are struggling to identify things that they want to do for self-care because they just haven't done it, I'm like, name 5 activities that nourish you. What are 5 activities that fill you up? Start there. And so that's and then we also do panel conversations on our YouTube channel where we bring women together from our network that have been on our podcast, talk about week to week those different areas that impact our ability to live well, whether it's menopausal care, infertility, period care, divorce, abuse. We're going to have a whole section on UTIs, like women suffering with UTI, all the things we've been told not to talk about, all the words we've been told not to say that impact our ability to live well and get the care that we need. And then we have a book that really allows people to engage with our talking points in a tangible way. So it's all these talking points I mentioned with ways to engage with them. and snippets from our first 4 seasons of our podcast of stories that you can relate to from our guests. And so we've created these spaces and hope that people and women will really start embodying these in themselves and invite other women to do so, because we shift narratives as women when we do it together. They want us to stay divided. They want us to see each other as competition. They want you and I to be like, oh, I can't be on her podcast because that might take away from my podcast. No, it's actually the opposite. You and I are both having important conversations that need to be had, that we need to let everybody know about. And when we make space for that, it makes space for other women as well. And so really just flipping the narrative on these things. And you can learn about all of this at embracinglayers.com. It's all there. But that is
layers.com.
Yeah, it's all there. All the things I've just talked about are all there. How you can follow us on socials, all that. But most importantly, it's having these discussions with each other and being honest and authentic and creating safe spaces for women to feel like they can have these conversations and ask these questions too.
Yeah. I love collective wisdom. I love collaboration over competition. This is how we learn and grow.
Absolutely.
We're all winners.
We are. And we all have our own story. We are a collective as women, but we all have our own story and our own layers that come into this, whether based on our background that we grew up in, whether it's trauma informed, not ethnicity, faith space, socioeconomic space. All of these things impact our journeys and impact our ability to be able to embrace our layers and live out feel. And we need to hear these stories from each other so we know how to show up empathetically and supportive for others who may not have a voice, who may not have a place. That's where I'm a very privileged white woman in the United States. I have an opportunity to highlight these voices and share these stories so we can all come in together and make this a safe place for all women.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's been such a treat to have you today. And just to make sure people know how to reach you, is the best way through your website?
Yeah, the best way is through our website. Everything's there. How to follow us. You can contact form, our book, our resources from our guests that they share, all of our podcasts, links to all of our panel conversations. It's all there. If you want me to speak, go to the contact form. It's all there at embracinglayers.com.
Awesome. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Karen, for so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.